Hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. I suppose my relationship to Charlie's Angels is very much in keeping with society's relationship to the Charlie's Angels property. You know, the Charlie's Angels, of course, on some level is beloved. It is a 70s classic that, on the one hand, yes, there is a certain amount of sort of objectification and misogyny in their conception, but on another level, there was something liberating about it, and there was something about empowerment and, I suppose, the retaking of one's own sexuality about Charlie's Angels as it evolved, and of course the various iterations sort of contemplated the property. Even going back to the 70s show, there is that sense that people don't talk about it with sort of a wry smile and with that sense of, oh, Charlie's Angels, it was a sexed up show that was purely there for male fantasy. It is treated with a certain degree of reverence and respect, despite the fact that it was, a male-created show, sort of male gaze towards a set of female characters. Its influence has permeated beyond that. And so when you sort of, you had the original Charlie's Angels, and then of course we had the McG reimaginings, continuations, reboot, whatever you want to call it. And it's difficult because, yes, critically, it's not remembered particularly well. Particularly, specifically the second one. The first one, general audiences seem to give a sort of pass towards, but the second one is quite brutally panned. My personal relationship to those McG films, I'm very conscious and critically aware that they're not good films insofar as there is something a bit lurid about them. There is something a bit throwback about them. Considering these were 2000s films, there is that sense of, the male gaze aspect of it, the slightly Michael Bay-esque over-the-top scale of it, the ridiculousness of it. But that being said, and of course it may be the fact that I saw both those films at an age where, of course, I was very young when I saw them, and they, there was something, it was at a period where a film full of action and sort of the style of McG would absolutely have appealed to me at the age that I was. And so I actually have always had quite a love, particularly for the first Charlie's Angels film. Because it's ultimately about the chemistry of the cast, of your three leads. And it's got to have a sense of humour about itself. And the action is really good, and there is a sense of scale and spectacle and the right balance of sort of silliness and self-aware text alongside, a actually well-made action, a sort of female-led action movie, what could have been franchise. And of course the challenge then became, okay, we've got this female-fronted film, we've got this sense of action, we can make it, we can make it empowering and take back the narrative, but the question is, we need we need the right voices and the right faces to really take Charlie's Angels to the next level and take it from what it was originally to being, a sort of female empowerment film and a strong narrative for sort of women feminist storytelling. There was the 2011 one season TV series, and I appreciate that was an attempt to make the Charlie's Angels property grittier, of course returning it to TV, so it's much more episodic and much more sort of street based. But from what and now I haven't seen this show, but from what I understand of it, is that it tried to strip away the sense of humour. It tried to strip away. It tried to make it much more procedural and more. There was a certain sense of, okay, we're not silly here. This is a serious drama with a sort of network style sense of humour, but we are taking ourselves very seriously in what we're making, and unfortunately Charlie's Angels doesn't seem to work with that. It doesn't seem to sort of, if the property takes itself too seriously, it just doesn't fit, I suppose. And so then we get to 2019's Charlie's Angels. And so our three leads are Kristen Stewart, Naomi Scott, and what's her name again? Ella Balinski, is that right? Producer wife?
Yes.
Yes. The third actress is, of the three, she is sort of the new face to Hollywood, of course, because Naomi Scott has had several films and, hadn't long been in the Power Rangers film, and of course Kristen Stewart has had a decades-long career. And, of course, directed by Elizabeth Banks and starring Elizabeth Banks as one of the numerous Bosleys that we will meet in this version. And, of course, unfortunately, this is another case of a film that just got completely... I don't know if it got railroaded. I don't know if because of the timing of it, because of the pandemic, sort of... It was before the pandemic, but culturally speaking, I don't know, it just came in a bit of a time when people weren't really ready for a Charlie's Angels film, and it got incredibly lambasted, and so much so that I personally didn't really have any interest in seeing it. And it's tricky because it's not watching it now and had to sort of thinking, okay, what works for the Charlie's Angels and what works here and what doesn't work. The elements are all in place. They all work. They all seem to work together quite well. You've got, three pretty strong leads who each have a distinct identity. They seem to have okay chemistry. That's one of the challenges that it has. But I'll go on to that. It seems to have a sense of humour. It seems to know where to scale the action, and yet the pieces don't seem to quite come together. And I can't fully put my finger on why. Why? Because this is no less good than the McGee one. This is, the McGee one, yes, okay, not many films were like that film at the time, and it's only 2 decades on that we've sort of developed an appreciation for sort of big scale action with sort of your Fast and Furiouses and that style of almost superhuman, unrealistic action films that are supposed to be realistic. They're not superheroes, they are supposed to be people, but, very much in the sort of Mission Impossible, Fast and Furious style. Everyone is just that little bit more indestructible than they probably should be. But here, I don't know. Because the story, I suppose the problem is I can't help but put it alongside the McGee film. I can't help but think, okay, where did this zig where that zagged, and where did it sort of retain a sense of itself? On the one hand, Kristen Stewart is really good, and it is really great to see Kristen Stewart do a very different kind of role, and it's very much an acknowledgement of her experimenting and trying different things. Of course, like many of the young actors who came out of Twilight, there is unfortunately a sense of tarring her with a certain brush, and the constant sort of criticisms of her as an actress because of being associated with that property. I don't have any great love for the Twilight franchise, and I think the films aren't particularly good critically. Like, I think there are things in them that are okay, but I genuinely don't. I don't appreciate the narrative. I do think that it was, like with many of the YA properties, a great breeding ground for strong talent and sort of ushering in a new era of actors. And I think Kristen Stewart is definitely one of those actors who has gone from strength to strength. Admittedly, I didn't see her talents early on in her career. It was only when it got to films like Cafe Society that I started to go, oh, there is a bit more range to Kristen Stewart. That there is, she is, and a film like Charlie's Angels, where she's really, pushing against the fact that people criticise her for being quite stoic, quite, choosing roles where she's not, she remains emotionally aloof or distant and very sort of serious. Even a film, like I say, even the films which I rate that she's in, like Cafe Society, like Still Alice, she is still playing characters who have that type of personality. That being said, this is an example of her pushing the boat out and experimenting and going, showing that she can play funny and play someone who's a bit more off the wall, more rebellious with a full colour of personality rather than someone deathly serious. And I think she definitely leads the trio. Not to say that Belinska or Scott aren't good in their own rights. They are a nice trio. I don't think the film... I think the film believes they have more chemistry than is demonstrated on screen. Because the narrative requires moments where they go through distinctive arcs, and you've got sort of your newbie one who is sort of introduced to the Angels program through the case that they are currently doing. You've got the cold, efficient one who needs to show more emotions, and then you've got the one who's a bit more off the wall who possibly could take things more seriously and not be so reckless. And so they have distinctive arcs. And again, the film, there are moments where those arcs collide, and it's very much about them depending on each other as a team. But unfortunately, it just doesn't quite work, because it requires us to believe that they genuinely care for each other as a trio. And yet, I don't know, it's not apparent enough that their feelings, that as a team, their bond is as strong as we're being told it is. And so I think that at its core is probably the first major problem. And it ties, I suppose, into the bigger issue, which is, and it's really difficult for this, but I think it's great that Elizabeth Banks is going into directing. I think she has even in this, there is a clear, ambitious sense of wanting to go for a high-scale action with really strong set pieces. And, Elizabeth Banks is demonstrating that she can sort of, she can direct a ship like a big property. Charlie's Angels might have waned over the years, but it's still a respected and known property that some people have a great value for. The problem, I think, and this is more technically, is the fact that I feel like Elizabeth Banks, I don't know, I feel the direction here is just a little bit flat. It's just, whereas McGee, for all of his faults, you genuinely felt that he was going bombastic with it, that everything was ratcheted up to 11. The explosions were at 11, the emotional moments were at 11, the comedy was at 11, and sometimes we didn't need that. We possibly didn't always need that, but by going so over the top with it, you always felt that sense of, I don't know, someone throwing everything and the kitchen sink. whereas at the screen, whereas the Elizabeth Banks ones, it does feel that sense of constraint, that it feels like it wants to be sort of silly, but also action-filled and also characterful. But at the same time, it all comes across as just that little bit flat. The comedy is just a little off. It's the action pieces, though there are some interesting and cool action set pieces, they're just... And perhaps it's the fact that, I'm comparing it to a 20-year-old film, and I don't know if this film is too much like that, even though we have had 2 decades on of action and films like that, but it just doesn't... There's nothing special about it. There's nothing... I can't remember any particular set pieces or any particular moments in it that really stood out. And as I say, there's just a certain deflated nature for the whole thing. So everything... The action pieces don't feel climactic. The comedy sort of falls down at almost every turn. And it's very much going for that same MCU style, serious conversation. Character almost breaks that conversation to make a wry comment about something superfluous. But of course, we've seen it in the MCU. We've seen it done well. We've seen it done badly in the MCU. And here it is, it is a C- at best at that level of quality, where it's like, okay, all you've done is sort of break up a scene to have this quick, witty exchange, but it's not... It doesn't fill the space of comedy in the same way. And again, the cast, as well as your trio and Elizabeth Banks and Patrick Stewart and Djimon Hounsou, who again I will always give time for Djimon Hounsou because I just think he's a great actor who doesn't get enough love and attention. Even Sam Claflin. You've got this great cast, and yet I don't know, it just doesn't... It doesn't excite me when I'm watching it. There are moments where I'm like, oh, it's really cool to see Patrick Stewart here and doing this kind of role. Playing sort of supposedly the original Bosley. And the idea that Bosleys are actually a code name, and you've got all of these different Bosleys, but he's the first one, and sort of the arc that spirals out of that. It's an interesting idea. And again, it's just, you have this great cast and this property, and yet it still just feels rather underwhelming. And so when you get to the climax, and you've got sort of like the McG ones, you've got very twisty twists and moments where everyone's double crossing and you don't quite know who's doing what. And then of course you have your big action climactic set pieces, and then everything just sort of ends flatly. It doesn't feel like there's a sense of stake. It doesn't... The relationships don't feel complete, and everyone just feels like they're packing up and going home. Even to the point where the film ends, the ending feels rather superfluous. It's just, oh, now onto this next thing. And of course, unfortunately, as is the way with IPs, there is this clear desire to build this into a bigger franchise. And the way they set it up clearly is trying to prepare us for the next chapter. But the chances are, the impression I get is that this didn't go down particularly well. I can't see it getting a sequel, and that makes that ending even more underwhelming, simply because it builds to nothing. And I don't know. I suppose the one thing I will say, as I started this, is the idea of the transition from a female-led but very male-gazy, male-directed, male-driven story from the 70s, 80s era that has evolved into something that was supposed to be more, with scale, with, three incredible leads from the McG films. And then, as I say, the transition to being not only female-led, but female-driven. That we have a female director, a female writer. And I have to at least give it the fact that is the direction it is clearly trying to go. And so even though it doesn't work, I almost want to sort of acknowledge it and say, yes, it didn't work, but let's keep it going. Let's see this type, on some level, this is still, unfortunately, untested ground, where we have these female-led, action, over-the-top, Fast and Furious style stories. Let's allow a female director to keep pushing the boundaries there, because lessons need to be learned. And if this hasn't worked, which I don't think it has, then the lesson should be learned. Okay, let's try this again, but let's do something different with it, whether it's a sequel to this or whether it's a different director coming in and doing something different with this or another property. But it just boils down to the fact that I can't not acknowledge the fact that, the mission statement behind it was really important. It just, unfortunately, if you're thinking about the politics of it and the actual product, the politics are well-intended, is subpar. And so we want the next step, which is to say the politics are great. We want to see this, this feminist, both behind and in front of the camera, derived film. But we also need it to be a good film with that intention behind it. And I think that's very possible. But if they're going to do Charlie's Angels, they need to work out how it works in the modern age, what it means, and maybe there is a possibility that the Charlie's Angels just doesn't work in this era. That we are just beyond what Charlie's Angels was. I don't believe that, because I think anything can be reinterpreted and resurrected in a way that's more appealing to a modern sensibility. But it has to be done well, and I think that's the challenge, and that's the nature of it. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, comment below, and share the video, because it's all helping the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded. Check out my back catalogue of over 250 videos, and follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I tweet about TV shows and films, and I share these videos once they're uploaded to YouTube, either the day of or the day after. Thank you for joining me. Take care.